don't mean anything, but thanks for listening. Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to We Say Things, episode 60. My name is Sunsfan. Joining me is Cinderin and a very special guest who will not be allowed to say anything until we go over our patron shout-out. Cinderin, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, okay. As always, big thanks everybody in Bruges tier for contributing as much as you do to the podcast and keeping it running. Of course, we're talking about Bacon. No, not that Bacon. The other Bacon. Lick, Puco, Tickles, Houston Adamo, Shark TM, Hoey 988, Pog _enthusiast. Oh, that's nice. Freshly seasoned goat balls, also nice. Change will happen. Poop Feast 420, Hugh G, Rection, and Ben Broomhead has a broomhead. Ben Jackson is superior.
Also, a super thank you. It's always more awkward when there's a guest on. Thank you to Dop. Thank you to Mom Naeem Yachoznak, Fane _man, Ben Broomhead is cooler than Ben Jackson, Pitch Black, Fellowship of the Ping, DG, Terry Tip, Wooden Aftertaste, Dun Talk, The Coward, Dyslexic Lawyer, Anonymous, and Ronnie Keel. Thank you guys very much for being our supporters. So, with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Nikki Elise, otherwise known as... Don't give me that face. Otherwise known as Sajedene. She is a former talent agent in Hollywood. She helped run all the captain's drafts. She's an agent in the Dota scene. Well, actually, esports in general. Streamer, artist, and of course, most famously, the girlfriend of the greatest Dota 2 talent of all time, Sunsfan. So, how's it going, Nikki?
Wow, Sunsfan.
I thought that was only Pixel, not you, but okay.
Thank you. I hear that all the time. She calls out his name all the time.
No.
Thank you for joining us on this very awkward... Don't worry, we're not going to cut that out. So, Nikki, before... well, obviously we brought you on because there's been a lot of drama in the scene, and we needed a female perspective, and you and I have talked about a lot of this stuff privately, of course.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be a bit of a heavy episode, which... you know, is good from time to time. We need to definitely focus on some of that stuff. Do you want to give a little bit of your background before we get started? Other than what I already said.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of, I guess, expound on that, I got into the Dota scene. I was still working as a talent agent in LA. I was there for probably about 4 years. Met you. Also got into streaming at around the same time. So talking to you, and I think met a couple of the NA players at the time. And when they found out what I did, they would poke me like, "Hey, can you take a look at our contracts?" And I was like, "Sure." And it kind of just like snowballed from there. TI3, TI4 like helped a lot with like Dota Cinema stuff, and then we kind of just collaborated a lot in many different projects, and I also try to do like my own things here and there.
So for contract stuff, if I ever am underpaid, it's your fault, right? Is that how it goes? The agent's always at fault.
That's only if you go through me.
Exactly.
Sure.
Good. I'm glad we have that. This is my favorite part.
All right, so we're going to have to start doing it that way then.
My favorite part about having you on this podcast is I can make you agree to things now. Like, I'm right about something every now and then, Because apparently I'm usually wrong about everything. I will admit that fully. But when I'm right, I make sure that Nikki knows that I am very right.
Like yesterday?
What happened yesterday?
How did that turn out for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean... I'm right 1 out of 10 times, Cinder. Not to make this more awkward for you as we start this.
Not that bad, actually. That's
thank you.
Better
than
I thought.
Okay, so this isn't going to be like a typical episode where we go through your whole life like we've had in the past with some of the guest episodes, because we just have a lot of stuff to cover. So I figured before we get into the Dota stuff, since you kind of pay attention to other scenes as a whole, A lot of other industries within esports, I suppose, have been experiencing some of the same movements. Do you want to give us maybe I don't know if a TLDR is the right way to just summarize everything, and we don't need to like go into detail by any means, but tell us about other scenes that we would maybe not have heard about.
I mean, so the gaming industry in general is, or streaming scene, I suppose, and esports scene in general is kind of going through their own movement. A few notable big ones, especially in the streaming / Twitch, scene, other than, I guess, Mixer shutting down. There was Fedmeister from Offline TV, and I believe their former manager were both accused or called, like, doing inappropriate actions with their roommates, who are all also very popular streamers. An interesting one that I remember reading about was iCasper, because he was in charge of doing a lot of charity work for Twitch, especially when it came to like TwitchCon and stuff, which, that's something that I did like before. So having to have interactions with them, and a lot of the people that would participate in charity events actually had to kind of, have these experiences which were not very great. And it goes all the way up the ladder, because you have even employees of Twitch being called out in the movement. So that's going to be interesting. So Twitch is kind of stepping in and saying, oh yeah, we're not going to put up with this. A lot of the streamers have already been banned or are going to be, but then people are still putting a lot of pressure as far as Twitch taking action. The Smash community is a big mess. There is a mega thread for anybody interested in catching up and looking at all of the long list, the laundry list that they're experiencing. It's a lot, but some of the notable names and situations that have come out is Zero, Nairo, Sinpai. A lot of it involves underage relationships, exploits and grooming. So if that's a trigger warning for people, kind of just like a heads up on that. And I believe Sky Williams is, once again, this was tonight, Sky Williams is, putting his statements out there. So we'll kind of have to keep an eye on how that falls out. Yeah, I mean, it's, and that's just like, I guess, in streaming. I know other industries are doing the same thing. The art and comic book industry and convention scene is also going through something similar at the same time. So, but
I didn't
yeah.
look too into detail on a lot of this stuff, but I looked at the mega thread and I read some comments and I read a couple twit longers in regards to like the Smash stuff specifically, and Nintendo did not ever have anything to do with the esports scene before, and everybody complained about it. I can't see that ever happening now. That is, I don't know, is that recoverable? I don't even know what the fallout is going to be for something that major. But yeah, that I guess is just the summarization of some of the other scenes going on right now. But of course, we're going to focus more on Dota. So what I want to do is talk by myself for about 5 minutes straight. I'm just going to list all the stuff, not all the stuff, but some of the major things that happened over the past of the course 2-3 weeks. We're not going to go into detail on any of the specific cases, at least not yet. We can reference some of it afterwards. It's not going to be a chronological order or anything like that. There's no particular order. But I do want to say thanks to Raynessa for making the mega thread on this, because there's a lot of shit. So it was a lot easier to look at some of the highlights. So first, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Cinder, but Grant, women came out against him. Llama Down Under being one of them. She filed a restraining order way back when and felt that Grant's behavior was enabled by community members. And then Grant ends up writing that he's leaving the scene for a long time, if not permanent. And then after he wrote that, somebody came out reporting that he drugged them and raped them at one of the TIs, at TI4, I think it was.
I think so, yeah. I think that was TI4.
And again, this is not chronological at all. Toby, this is maybe the biggest one. Multiple reports about Toby and sexual assault, some of which he admitted to. Code Red drops him. Toby's voice lines immediately removed from the game via Valve. Toby ends up tweeting he deleted some tweets, but overall, I think a lot of the sentiment from the general public was, I mean, there's some split obviously, but was that he was kind of using his kid as a shield to a degree. I guess, well, we can talk about that later if needed. But all in all, he ends up tweeting something as a final tweet, if you will, basically retiring from the scene. Then, towards the beginning, Zayuri and Ashley Christ had some drama from way back when. Ashley Christ made a twit longer, basically saying that she felt pressured to sleep with Zayuri in order to get into the scene, and Zayuri's response was basically he had no idea that she felt this way for all this time. That one we might be getting into a little bit later because the general reception was very polarizing. Not to go off on a tangent, but it feels like Nikki and I can see both perspectives, but I think Nikki can see both perspectives, but we still disagree on a lot of the details. Not the details, but what's the right way to summarize? It feels like every couple we talk to, it's like split, right? Isn't that how it feels like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. And then we had drama with Demon. Elaine, who used to work for Twitch, reports that he was basically being slimy, which I heard a lot of rumors about him back in the day as well. His response was very weird. Actually, that's probably the weirdest response I've ever seen in any scene, any industry. And I think one of the comments referenced the fact that it sounded like he just picked up a thesaurus and replaced 50% of the words with things that are quote unquote synonyms, but most of them just didn't work. It's just really weird. But he did update his tweet, I guess, saying he's going to take some more time off and then come back with a better response or something to that degree. Then we had more drama with Digital Chaos, our second manager, talking about an individual that I referenced early on. I think it's episode 2 or 3 where I talk about some of the details behind Digital Chaos, and the co-owner with me, or the majority owner, I guess, his name is Tom. He is basically in jail for fraud, amongst other things, and she claims that she was sexually harassed by Tom, which, of course, at the time I didn't know about, but I'm not surprised at all because Nikki went through a bunch of shit before that, I did want to talk about this a little bit just because I did discuss, like I said in an earlier episode, but I didn't go into any details. And the reason I didn't go into details is because it would have to talk about Nikki's experiences, which I'm not going to do that unless she ever wants to come out with it at some point. So we're just going to leave it at that. And then the final thing, in terms of what's been going on the last couple of weeks, Red Eye is basically out of the scene. So a host named James Banks, I knew about this thing for a while, by the way. I don't know about you guys. He's been writing something for quite a while, basically saying that Red Eye has been pushing him out of the scene for years because he didn't like him, preventing him from getting jobs, which led to a lot of suicidal tendencies or thoughts or whatever you want to call them from James himself. And then, of course, he reported, and this one I heard about as well a long time ago, reports and testimonies from witnesses of a physical altercation between Red Eye and somebody at one of the events. And Red Eye's initial response was essentially denying a majority of the accusations. And then he ended up tweeting a couple days later something to the effect of, following the attacks made on my character over the last few days, I've decided to walk away from esports. So that is the super summarized version of a lot of the events that have occurred. So I guess we'll start with me. Stop talking now, Nikki. Maybe the first topic we should talk about is, why did it take so long for some of this stuff to come out? Because when it comes to Red Eye and Toby, which, Cinder and I can give some credence to some of this, there's been rumors for years. So why does it take so long for this stuff to get out?
It's scary. It's scary for many reasons, I feel like, where it's scary to admit that it happened to you and you let it happen. It's scary to put it out there because you're going to get judged by everybody, and and you're going to get judged by, especially if it's a personality, by their fans, by your friends, your family, like, and there's a huge like fallout as well. You know, you risk what? If you're part of the industry, you risk your position of your work, your friendships, your relationships here, especially if what happened to you, you know, regardless of how traumatizing it is in your experience, if other people deem it as that doesn't sound so bad, or something that I heard a lot when I tried to, you know, talk to people about some of my experiences is, oh, that's just so and so being you know, being them, like that, don't worry about it, like they brush it off. So you start questioning, well, okay, maybe what happened to me wasn't that bad. Then you just minimize it, and then so why come out, why continue like trying to do something about it? And then you kind of just start, you know, that's how the girls, like, you whisper with each other and say, hey, you know, just kind of be careful about them, like I heard this happened to her or that happened to me, so I just want you to watch out. And so that's how we end up having to like look out for each other. And then when somebody suddenly finally speaks up and says something, you know, then other people, other women, you know, other victims or whatever, like they feel a little more empowered to speak up and say, hey, it didn't just happen to them, it happened to me too. And theirs wasn't like, you know, like that's one thing, and then this is like my thing. Like if you notice, like a lot of the times when news comes out, it's escalating, where it starts off pretty small and then it just like suddenly, well, you know, he tried to kiss me, or he said something nasty, well, he did that, but, and then you start seeing this pattern, and it's always like the same, you know, people with like this different stories about them, and then you're like, what the heck? So I think that's a big one. Honestly, like the fact that if it, like a lot of it is like, you know, pro players, or at the time Demon was a pro player, and someone like Toby, who, and even Grant, where he was, like these are people that are beloved, get hired constantly. What can someone like me, or someone like, even someone like myself, I feel like is in a position of privilege and I don't feel comfortable talking? What about if you're just like someone who, you know, happened to be attending the event and you got to meet your favorite caster, and then suddenly something like that happened? What do you do? There's so much power over your decision of wanting to say something, so you kind of just like drop it and minimize it, you know?
I mean,
So,
something that happens quite a bit as well, right? With all the stuff that you said, is that people try to, you know, it's such a long process to just deal with it on a personal level, just what happened to you, and then there's the
yeah,
bigger perspective. And I guess what happens in a lot of cases is that people kind of compartmentalize it at some point, where it's just like, okay, this happened to me. You kind of come to terms with it, and then you try to pack it away, because if you keep thinking about it all the time, it just makes you miserable.
right.
So that probably also contributes a lot, right? Because if you look
Oh,
over the span of, let's say it takes like 5 to 10 years or whatever for some of this stuff to come out, a lot of the years is probably, you know, it's intense and comes and goes at times, and then it kind of fades away again, and then some sort of memory or some sort of event can respark the memory, right, in you, when it happens to other people, or you hear
right.
something about somebody and you just try to pack it away because it makes you feel bad. um,
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's exactly that. Like, I mean, personally for myself, I'm still, you know, struggling with my, I don't know when if I'll ever be ready to talk about it. And I know I'm not the only one. Like like these stories seem like they're, that's like, it's nothing. I have so many messages from other women and friends, and like, you know, girls that I've encountered through how many TIs that I've been to. And then you hear them like, you know, say, I know this already came out about this person, I don't know if I want to talk about what happened to me. And they say that they, you know, like it's been years and they're still angry, they're still fighting it, they're still
mhm.
struggling with it, and it's still causing depression for them. And do they want to open up the floodgates of people suddenly questioning what they're feeling and what they're experiencing? And it's not something that a lot of, you know, people, men or women, is really strong enough to be able to handle that, you know. And it's rough. So.
Yeah, it feels like it gets to a certain point where, I mean, like you said, somebody comes out with a story and that gives you, I can't relate to this, honestly, because I don't know anything about it, but it gives you, I assume, courage to come forward yourself, to give your story up. And I do agree that the percentage of people that are, let's say, in the Dota scene, again, I don't have evidence on literally anything, but the percentage of people that have come out versus people that haven't, it's probably quite still very low percentage.
Yeah.
At least if the societal like statistics tell us anything.
I mean, anecdotally speaking for myself, just because we all talk, like the women in Dota, we're as a group, you know, we all message each other. We all try to look out for each other. Yeah, not all of them are out. Not all of them are comfortable with being out. Some of them are in positions that they can't risk it. It's too risky for them because what are you know, you risk your career, you risk, even now with all of this happening, that is still a very, very real and big risk for them. And it's kind of unfortunate that that's the case. I mean, me and Shannon always joke, like, when we retire, we'll just write a book about everything and everyone.
Can't wait. Holy shit. God,
But
I can't wait.
right now, what do you do? How, like, you know, this is your life. And
yeah, it's definitely
how do you
scary
weigh
from
it?
a bunch
Yeah.
of perspectives for sure. And I think if I don't know, I don't know how to wrap this up exactly. I do want to give my 2 cents on both Toby and Red Eye, if that's okay, on things that I knew about, quote unquote, or heard about, just to give perspective. Because I think there's one side of the, let's say, the backlash, even though I think it's the vocal minority that are having backlash on things of this nature. They're very vocal. And I think part of it comes from the fact that they feel like they know, and we'll get to this probably topic a little bit later, but they feel like they know the personality really well. Whereas apparently the people that worked with them did not know them at all. I mean, there's a reason that people are turning on them immediately. It has nothing to do with themselves. It has to do with, oh, finally it's come out. So for Toby specifically, and this is my story, again, I first met him, it was between TI1 and TI2. We had a Skype meeting. He was at Join Dota. I remember we had the webcam set up. I don't remember why we were meeting. Dota Cinema was just taking off, so it was like really cool to talk to somebody that was higher up in the scene. It was me, Toby, and Neil. And I remember during the call, I literally think of this every single time I've ever worked with Toby, or like even somebody brought him up. This story always comes up in my head, even though it's not that big of a deal in and of itself. It just always stuck with me because I feel like I'm a very principled person in nature. I feel like I'm a decent judge of character. But I remember we were just talking. We didn't really know each other, and like within 5 minutes, he started bragging about how he'd had sex with somebody in the scene. And I'm like, why is, like, I'm thinking to myself, why is he talking? He's like bragging about it. He just kept going on and on. I'm like, God, this is like, it rubbed me in such a wrong way that I won't lie. I was pretty biased about it for the last, how long has it been? It's like 9 years, but it gets reinforced with every rumor you hear about him, which there are so many rumors. Of course, you don't know what's real. You don't have the evidence yourself until people come out. Like, I've heard of a couple ones that are really bad that just haven't come out, or they're not real. I'm not sure. But the ones that have come out are bad enough to end a career, and as they should. And then when it comes to Red Eye, I only worked with him a couple times. I personally didn't have any issues, but I did hear rumors about him beating the shit out of somebody at a past event, how he's very hard to work with. So again, like, this information coming out, it's not like I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe this is true. It's more, wow, it's about fucking time that some of this comes to light, you know? But I don't know if that's just my perspective.
Yeah, and I also think, like, if the listeners try to put themselves in your shoes on something like this, like, you can have a feeling that something is going on, or you can have an idea that, based on these rumors, you like make your own idea up in your mind, but you can't come forward and accuse stuff and say, I've heard a lot of rumors, because if they're not true, you're committing character suicide and you're kind of defaming the other person. So like, from a professional perspective, it makes no sense. And from like a personal perspective as well, it's like, it's really hard accusations to make based on rumors, right? That's why a lot of the people that have like a feeling or think something, you're kind of at the mercy of people coming forward. And I think what's really important is that instead of like blaming people when they finally tell their stories after so many years and being like, oh, why didn't you just say it earlier? Everything could have been so different. It's really important to try to be understanding of how difficult it is and how big of a step it actually is to do it, rather than the fact that it took so long. Because like you see this in a lot of things. I think there's a pretty good parallel to draw here to Hollywood as well, right? I don't know, Nikki, if that's something you can relate to since you had some agency going on there as well. But all of the stuff in Hollywood also took many years before those people got outed, and it's basically the exact same story, right? Just in a much bigger industry with much bigger
people
names.
lost their jobs or didn't get hired just because of the fact that they were deemed difficult, and because they chose to speak out or fight against what was going on, you know. And I mean, even like with the Scientology stuff, like no, that's like the loudest whisper in that industry right there. You know, it's it's like a whole other beast. But that's kind of, and I know we're going to talk about it next, is like it's a power dynamic thing. Like when people are in positions of power, which is, you know, using like Red Eye and Toby or were in positions of power over these people, not just with the people that they, you know, that they interacted with in a very negative way, but even their coworkers and their peers and friends. If Shannon, like if you hear something like that, like sure, you could say, people could say, oh, why didn't you try and find out more? Why didn't you go the extra step of doing something like this? And then you say, well, what are you supposed to do? Who are you supposed to report it? Like, am I going to write an email to Valve and say, hey, Valve, this is what I heard, and or this is what this girl is saying, or this girl, like as a girl, like, hey, Valve, this is what happened to me. Can you do something? I'm like, no. What are you going to do? There's very little course of action when it comes to stuff like that. And like even if I tell a tournament organizer this, they're going to say, well, we can't really, we can't really risk not hiring one of the, if not the most popular caster or host for our event that's going to be bringing in viewers. And if you want to get hired for an event, which is I think the biggest problem or the biggest issue with the Red Eye situation, and that's power dynamics between men. So it's not just a man-woman thing, it's even between men, that I can't speak up because I want to get hired for the next event. And it's a scary thing to have to like deal with. And it's, you know, it's not just women experience it, men experience it just in a different way. So,
well, what are you guys' thoughts on, in terms of the power dynamic, the Red Eye situation, where according to James, he essentially prevented him from getting hired at any events and just purposely tried to ruin his career. Again, Red Eye came out and basically said some of this stuff is not true, but the fact that I mean, I don't want to speculate, but we're going to in this one specifically, or at least I am. The fact that he left the scene the way he did speaks to me that there's something more there. I thought that was very weird that he would just leave like that. But that's a whole nother discussion itself. So in terms of the power dynamics between, let's just talk about the Red Eye situation. What are your guys' thoughts on what happened with him?
I mean, first of all, from my perspective, I kind of had the same experience with him as you've talked about, right? Like, I haven't had problems with him. He's been good to me at events. We've worked very well together. I've always thought of him as very professional. I think there was 1 or 2 events I was at where he got visibly very angry and upset with production. But in his own words, which he also wrote in the statement, he knows that he can be hard to work with and be difficult, but he always does it in the interest of a good show, right? Like, and that's kind of the read that I had on him as well. Is like, he's really professional. So if in his opinion, people aren't doing their work properly or aren't trying hard enough to make a good product, he gets upset because he's very serious about making a good product. And, you know, that's a trait that a lot of people will have in whatever they do, that they're very, like, not necessarily perfectionists, but have very high standards. And that can be a good and a bad thing. But what I had not heard of or experienced in any way is any sort of physical abuse or any sort of like there's a step between yelling at people for being like, unsatisfied with work and for the stuff that he has been accused of from James, right? Like
Mm.
you can imagine a high pressure situation in a production like that things can get a bit heated. Stuff like that happens in all sorts of industries and stuff. And, peace be with that. It's not great that people get angry with each other, but that's a human thing. People have emotions and they get angry sometimes. But, you should have like this switch that you don't flick where you go into berserk mode, right? And yeah, so I never personally experienced any of that, but obviously the reports are there. There was something you didn't mention. There was one of the guy who actually got physically
punched,
assaulted, came out and talked about it. So he also, so he basically came forward. He was working at the event at the time where it happened.
It's really weird to deny that happened, and then somebody comes out and says, it did. I can back him up. Isn't that weird? That's so weird.
I don't know, man. It's just another example. So I guess this is a little bit off track. It's another example of where, we hear stuff, right? Like, or you experience, okay, Red Eye can be angry, but you don't, like, how many people would I have to just judge completely based on that? Like, if somebody I knew got angry, do I need to now assume that they're physically abusing other people? Like, of course you're not going to intuitively think that about other people. So it's not like a red flag for me that somebody is upset if things aren't going well. It's, it's a character trait, and some people are like that without going further than that, right? So just want to make that clear that, that there's probably other examples in esports and in our own experiences where somebody has been angry, but that was that. Like they had a bad day or something shit happened to them, it happens. But yeah, about the whole thing, I'm not really sure what to say. Like what's the motivation to begin with? Like, what is the motivation for shutting somebody down so hard? Is there something that hasn't been told? Because like,
maybe it's just a power move saying, if you made it difficult for me. Well, guess what? I'm more powerful. I can make it difficult for you.
Yeah, but was there
if you
anything
butt
in
heads with him?
I don't think in any of the stories that were told from both Banks and Red Eye that we got an explanation of how Banks made it hard for Red Eye, though. So it doesn't really seem like there's a motivation for vendetta, right? At least not that I could think of or see. But it's just...
Well, I suppose I can look at it like if we kind of circle back to the Grand Llama situation, where you people butt heads, and if sometimes when you're in a certain position, or if you have the capability or the platform and you don't like someone, you say, hey, I don't like you, and I'm gonna make it difficult for you and say all of these things about you. I don't know if that answers the why necessarily,
no, I get what you mean though.
But it's definitely something like, and maybe that's the power. That's the power part of the power dynamics, where with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, great. A Spider-Man quote. Thank you. Well, what about this one makes me a little uncomfortable to talk about, just because I feel like I know a lot of men feel this way as well, where they don't want to say the wrong thing. The Zyori Ashley Christ thing. Let's talk about the power dynamics there. So the things from that story, from both sides of the story, that I totally understand. Like from Zyori's side, I think the picture that he took was weird, and the fact that he wanted to lie about having sex to begin with, I thought that was weird. And I actually remember this. Now that after he mentioned, I'm like, oh, I remember him actually telling me that. Not that he lied, that he had done it. So that was definitely weird. But and this is where I get a little uncomfortable. So bear with me, because Nick and I've had a lot of discussions about this. But the Ashley Christ side of the story, I think the reason that makes me so uncomfortable is because I can understand all of it until the end of the post. She says, I didn't know rape could be so subtle, which implies very heavily that this was rape indeed. And that really bothers me. And I think a lot of people kind of have the same reaction. I think at first, for me, it nullified everything. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I had my reactions. But now I'm looking back, I'm like, if I just ignore that part, I can totally understand her perspective, and I don't really think that either side were necessarily doing anything malicious. It was just like bad communication, whatever you want to call it. But that word kind of sullied it to a degree at first for me.
And that's what happens in all sorts of cases, is that, and that's like you said, that's why you need to be so careful with what you say and how you say it, is that I actually think that story was really important and a really good example and a really good learning experience for both of them, and something that the entire community and the talent can learn from. But if there's this one little thing, then that, I mean, I'm not, okay, not one little thing, but it was just one sentence, right? In the grand scheme of the whole post, it was just one line. But if there's this one line that is misdirecting or causes, outrage, then it takes so much away from the rest of the post. And that's a shame, because like you said, people will gravitate towards that and point it out. And I think, I mean, rightfully so, if you throw around rape as a term, if it's not, or I mean, I'm sure we'll get Nikki's perspective on this too, if what she thinks about like the use of that word in this situation and in general. People will focus on that because, that is the big word in this whole instance. There's a lot of things going on, but that is the biggest word that gets dropped. And I'm sure this also lingers, or like goes back to the whole thing with coming out late, etc., is that it's a big accusation to make when you throw that in there. So you got to be really, go on.
Oh no, I mean, I know Ashley has, said something about wishing she didn't use the word, or wanting to like remove that that part from her thing, because it really does muddy up her message or what she was trying to convey, and something that is actually very real, which is kind of why a lot of men and women are so polarized when it comes to that particular case, is so many women experience something like that, and especially when there's a seen pattern of that behavior, where everyone's like, who the heck is Sayori? Like, why is Sayori considered like a power player in the scene? I'm like, come on. When you're literally someone who is your your first event, or you're trying to do something, anybody, I believe that summit was either my first or my second event as well, outside of anything to cinema. And everybody and their mother over there, I didn't know that was not hired at the same time as me. If they worked for BTS, I was like, oh my god, you guys are so awesome. Like, I didn't know, like, oh, they hired you to do the driving. Like, oh my gosh, you work for BTS. That's so cool. I have no idea what the hierarchy or what the rank was. And then you get put into that situation of, would doing this, or would doing this action, or saying that I slept with someone, put me in good graces with this person so that I can get another event. And we can say, man, how terrible of a person, how what a social climber you are, what a this, what a that. And I would like to get into that with power dynamics when you're a woman, because it's even like, it's so much more difficult to have to deal with and navigate that space, because so many people say, like, as a woman you have sex as a tool or as a weapon, but majority of the time it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it gets used against us more often than not, where men who use it are seen as something, as as a player. It's always something positive, like, they're spreading their seed, they're testing the waters, like they can get all of these women. And the quote that I hate the most, the master key can open but a lock that can be opened by so many keys. I'm like, that's a terrible. I mean,
I've never heard that before.
It's a very interesting analogy, but I'm starting, like, my downstairs is not a freaking lock. Like, I should be able to decide who I want in and out of that, if that makes sense.
Oh boy.
But
OD Pixel by the sounds of it.
Oh my god. Anyway, but I think that's kind of why so many women can relate to or can sympathize with what she went through, because there's so many questions that a lot of people don't ask and gloss over because of that specific word. Something that Shannon and I kind of go back and forth with is we actually don't know what happened in that room, how it was done that she felt pressured and he didn't think he pressured her to have those,
that's
you know,
probably the
to have
biggest
that
detail
action
that we don't
taken.
have.
And that's the biggest one. And to me, that's a very important thing, because and I think for all of them, because they get put in that situation so many times, is what kind of pressure was put on you. And it's something very relatable and very real, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was just the one word that really, I mean, for every guy, it's a scary word, you know? Very scary.
And I'll get into that too.
Especially the way it sounded like from Zayori's statements that he made, the video statements that he made. Like, it's a very big word to get called out for. If you, from your perspective, right? This is again the power dynamics. People, I think it's important to separate power dynamics where people use them deliberately and some don't, right? Based on Zayori's statement, we're not going to go into way more detail about this because we've talked about it a lot already, and there's a lot of other stuff you guys can read or listen to about it. But like, I think that was the important thing that Shannon pointed out, is that from both people, and after they've talked and everything has gone over, there was no malice involved from either of them. That's what they've both, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they've come to terms with it, both of them. They're like on the same page about what happened and why it's bad and why it needs to be avoided. But there was no malice, right? And if you feel like you did nothing malicious and you were just, you were looking to find someone to hang out with, you had a completely different read on the situation, and you get called out on rape for that, that hits hard, right? Again, now we're talking about that again, even though it was just the last line, but it hits so hard. Like, that's, you got to be on both sides of the coin here. You got to be really careful with the language used, that both the people accusing and the people getting accused use the right terminology, because it's, it's a pretty big deal. What you call out people for, and also in how they end up responding to you, right? I feel like, there's so much to learn from that one example, and just wanted to put that out.
So. Well, let's talk about, and we've seen a lot of opposing viewpoints from different cultures and whatnot. Nikki, you want to talk about that a little bit? Get the ball rolling?
Yeah. So, I think, okay, let me start off. I'm going to be, with this one, I try to do as much research that I can. If anybody's interested in looking up some of the sources for any of the statistics that I'm going to be bringing up, you could try RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. World Health Organization has released, a lot of data on this as well. The Women's Statistics Organization has a lot of a lot of maps, visual aids for people to see a lot of these data surveys that are done. But I know this is something that Cinderin, I think, would could kind of start off on, with the cultural differences based on some of the responses that people have been getting on the movement.
Yeah. So this is just how to say, this is anecdotal, because I don't have massive statistics or anything like that, but you can obviously contribute with that. But from my perspective, a lot of the stuff that I have been receiving and that I have seen others receive on the end of these accusations, something that stood out to me, I was curious, right? I don't know if I'm not sure how other people do something like this. Like, if there's somebody I really disagree with, right? Or somebody that fundamentally has a completely different worldview or a different viewpoint, I know a lot of people will just block them or stop talking to them entirely. I have a guy who I used to study with, for example, on Facebook, who has a very different worldview and a very different political stance than I do. And I still read his posts because I find, it teaches me something about the world and about how other people are. So the parallel I'm going to draw here is that a lot of the abuse that got thrown at me and others, a lot of people will just be like, okay, it's abuse, I'll block it. But I actually spent time looking at trying to see, okay, who are the people that throw this shit around? Like, and I don't know if I should do that because it kind of, burns you out that little bit extra because you're kind of digging deeper into that hole. But I don't know if I should call it some sort of morbid curiosity or whatever. I'm just trying to learn something about it. And something that I found is that there was a very clear trend that a lot of the people that threw around slurs or took the sides of the accused, there was a very clear majority of CIS and Asian responses, which I found really interesting because I was trying to think of it in a bigger perspective. If it was just like an anomaly and it was, just this case that it was that way. But then I thought, no matter whether it's an anomaly or not, I feel like this is something that didn't get brought up in the discussion at all, where when we talk about these cases, it's kind of like the internet is just thought of as one unit, right? It's like either this is good or this is bad, and people have opinions. But I think this part of it gets lost a lot along the way, that people come from very different backgrounds, from cultures that have very different views on women or on relationships or on sex, on marriage, all these kind of things, and you throw them into a melting pot together, and now they all need to attack this case and solve it together. Or, well, they don't need to solve it, but they have opinions and they're very different. And if you don't take that into account at all and you look at it, it's kind of like this minority versus majority thing where it's kind of difficult to gauge where things really stand. And I found that interesting to see that. And I think that's going to be a difficult one to crack, right? Like if the community, quote unquote, makes a verdict, let's say that, on a case of how we should do going forward with this, I think the way people respond will just always be different, right? Like even if the consensus is that someone should be shunned or they shouldn't, it should be redeemed, the viewpoints will definitely differ from country to country. And I haven't heard anybody talk about this in this discussion, which surprises me a little bit, that nobody brought that up.
Yeah. So to kind of go into the whole, I mean, one, the idea of it's Dota. Dota will have a predominant audience in, at least on our platforms. Remove China from this. SEA and the CIS region will have the most dominating fan base, followers. So a lot of our audience are from those regions. And when you brought that, I also noticed the same thing. And so I had to kind of do some research, a little research on it. And then if people weren't aware, I grew up in the Philippines. I was born there. I lived there for a very long time until I moved here to the United States. And at least I can easily speak for the Philippines in context of the SEA region and how it works over there. Philippines in particular, where Dota is so big, and it's a predominantly Catholic country, Roman Catholic, very conservative. I mean, it's making a lot of progress and all of that stuff. So I looked up some of the numbers. When you look at the percentage of rape and sexual harassment cases that get reported per country, with, I believe the US is sitting at 27%, and that's still considered grossly underreported. The Philippines and then Russia and the CIS region has about 6% for the Philippines, 3.4% for Russia. And you're like, man, that is so low. It's like no one's raping women over there, But you start digging a little deeper, which I did because I'm like, man, that's a very interesting statistics, with the numbers skyrocketing when you go to, to countries in Africa and all that stuff, and even in some parts of the Middle East. But I was doing my research and I was pulling up articles and then just kind of going back to what my experiences were when I lived there, and how women are seen and how women are perceived. And then you look at other numbers. Domestic violence abuse, exponentially high for both countries, or just for both regions. CIS and SEA domestic violence, very high. And that even includes violence and sexual assault when you're in your marital relationship. And it's high, and very high spousal abuse. I believe trafficking, women trafficking in particular, also very rampant in that region. So you kind of start seeing this trend of women are just not seen in a good way, for the culture to want to defend or stand up or put up barriers or protections for them.
Right.
That doesn't exist in that I mean, it does, but it's very minimal. I believe I also looked up barriers to reporting what causes these incidents. And I know in the Philippines, this is something that I remember growing up. We had the term comfort women for women that were either, that either prostituted themselves or were raped during World War II by the invaders, which was countries from like Japan and and whatnot. They were raped, and some of them have gotten pregnant, and it's so weird because it's very public knowledge that they're victims and they're kids that born from that terrible situation, and yet they are seen as tainted. They're not seen as someone that's good. It's like, it's dirty, you were touched. It's a very weird cultural thing to see, like, you should have protected yourself so that didn't happen. It's still very victim blaming as a society. Domestic violence in the Philippines is still very prevalent and doesn't even often get reported because and I know I looked this up as well for Russia, where the cultural barriers to reporting anything is so huge, and it includes physical punishment for the person who's reporting it, exile from family, and sometimes you even get killed for speaking up. So why would you even bother here? It's already, I feel like it's already really bad that, like, if I try to say something that I will be ostracized or whatever, but over there you actually could legitimately get killed. And that that situation, because I was like looking at, I believe, when the Russian talent and Russian casters were speaking up about all of this, you kind of like, man, that's kind of a opposite take of what I thought that they would do. Same thing even with the women talent, but I kind of put myself in their situation, where if things are so bad over there for a lot of women, that they're in that position that it might not even be the best situation when you're in another country or in another, like in a much better world. Maybe you already think that's what's good, and you don't even know any better at that point, because your barometer is just so skewed the other way. Right. And it's kind of sad and disappointing, but that's, I think, why a lot of that region just can't empathize with the women when they come out like that, because for them, you don't see it on television, you don't ever hear about it. Like, freaking in the Philippines, we make movies out of rape cases, like, that get shown in theaters. The case, like this case and that case, this massacre case, this rape case of this lady. It's nuts. And I mean, I'm hoping it's better, but that's what I grew up with, and I can't, so it doesn't surprise me that that's the kind of train of thought that a lot of men have.
I probably can't contribute that much to the discussion, other than I did live in the Middle East, and I don't know how much it's changed, but when I was there, it was very bad for women specifically. Heard stories of, well, they called it adultery, right? When a woman sleeps with another man, but in some cases it's just plain rape, and that they get stoned to death for getting raped. Like, it's as bad as it gets. Not sure if that's improved at all, but yeah. So a lot of the comments from Twitter, Reddit. Not as much on Reddit, I feel like, or to that extreme. It's mostly...
Reddit's very Western skewed as far as, like, it's NA and
so
Europe.
Facebook is probably the worst, I would assume. I just going off on a limb here. Facebook is probably the worst.
I don't know. I don't look at my Facebook because of how terrible the messages I get there.
Every death threat that I've gotten has been on Facebook, if that means anything to anybody. So that's the cultural differences. Let's talk a little bit about, and I kind of referenced it earlier, the hero worship, let's call it, where people that don't actually know, like let's just talk about the talent like Grant or Toby, people that don't actually know them at all other than their online personas are trying to discredit what happened, even though everybody in the scene is basically saying, I believe it. Like, how does that happen? Anybody.
Okay,
well, Syndred can go first.
Yeah, I'll read out the tweet that we there's a tweet that's really good at kind of breaking this down. So I'll just read the three of them. This is about the case with Fed that we mentioned earlier. So Fed wrote he will start off the week by apologizing for his absence, and he will make a okay, I'll just read them out literally. I want to start off this statement by apologizing for my absence the past few days. Earlier this week, some of my friends sat me down and expressed that I had on several occasions made them feel uncomfortable and uneasy. And then there's a response from a fan. Fed, I know you're a good person. I am both shocked and disappointed that this happened. I hope that leaving OTV and taking time off will help you grow as a person. Stay real, Fed. And then there's a response from this, it's a commentator, I believe, in League of Legends, from what I can see. LS, I don't know him personally, but his response was just really blunt to this. He writes, what the fuck do you mean I know you're a good person? You don't fucking know him at all. That's the whole point. You know an idea that is presented to you via the form of clips, stream persona, and other things. This is one of many parts of the whole movement. People aren't who you think. And I think this is a really powerful message. I mean, the language, obviously part of it. He sounds pretty, furious about it. But this is something that happens in every aspect of where people are fans, right? That fandom can go to the level of, almost fanaticism, right? Where it's like you just refuse to believe that this person that you look up to can do any wrong. You like paint this picture in your mind where you're predetermined that they are, I don't know if you want to say perfect, but they are without flaw, right? You see a lot of that in politics, especially right now in the US. There's definitely something with that, right? You see it with movie stars, with celebrities, with athletes, where the fans are just, you're unable or unwilling to accept the fact that it's actually another person and that people are not all flawless and they're not how you think they are. And that's really what's transferring here as well, right? Into gaming, in my opinion, also based on this tweet, right? That people, you only see what you see, right? And your access to a person as a fan is extremely limited. And I think coming to terms with that and understanding that is really important, that people don't get to this point where they start defending or treating somebody like a friend when they don't know them. It's like, maybe this is a weird tangent, but imagine you go to an event and somebody comes over to you and they like start talking to you like you've been friends for 10 years, right? Because they've watched your stream or seen you cast. And it's like, I don't know you. Like, that's really uncomfortable. That's a different scale and a different issue entirely. But it comes back to the same thing, that people get this like pseudo relationship with you from watching you so much, but you know nothing about them and they know very little about you, but they treat it like you've been friends for a very long time. That's this whole thing. And yeah, now go ahead, Nikki, with what you want to say.
No, it's absolutely correct. If anything, I will kind of go ahead of it's not just not knowing a lot about the person, but a lot of these personalities, what they tweet out, what they post on their social media is curated specifically to make you want to like them. It's specifically targeting that particular audience. We may not necessarily be on that end, but I've done a lot of PR work and marketing work, and one of the movies that we watched yesterday, where a politician is sitting down and saying, well, they think that you look a certain way and they really like it. They don't like how you wave your hand, stuff like that. That's a very real thing. I've sat down in a lot of PR meetings, and it's insane, all of the things that they kind of talk about. Oh, people don't like you when you wear this colored dress, so you should stop wearing it. So your stylist will now make notes of that. It's all curated for the audience. And I feel like because you succeed when you're able to make that connection. We hawk that to our influencers and to our talent and all that. If you make that connection with the fan, and they're a fan for life, they will always buy your stuff. They will always, watch your movies and buy your albums or whatever it is. But that also means that I guess they will also always defend you, even if you were convicted
Right.
of something. And that's kind of the unfortunate side effect of it. If I suppose if you were the accused, you kind of like the idea that you have all these people defending you, but it's an unfortunate thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Not to go off on a tangent, although you guys kind of brought it up, the fact that as a personality, the stuff you're tweeting, it's almost like you're a company, right?
Yeah.
Where
you should be. You kind of have to treat yourself like one.
Cinder is also this way. Me and Cinder are very bad at doing anything with Twitter or any social
me
media.
Too, yeah.
But for me personally, this is just a personal thing. If, like, obviously we got robbed at one point, we had some bad stuff happen to us, and then if I have something good happen to me, I take everything that is posted publicly, like in terms of personalities, for example, or people that I know in the scene, with a grain of salt if it's on social media. It means about 1 million times more if they message me personally. That's why if I feel like I need to reach out to somebody, say, hey, good job, or I'm very sorry this happened to you, it's always private. I almost never post about it because it means almost nothing when it's on social media. It's literally, it could be completely fake. You don't know what somebody's tweeting if they actually feel that way, But that's a little bit of a tangent.
I agree with you. I mean, my hang-ups on this. I have very, very personal frustrations with a lot of that because some of the people that were tweeting out support are people that I feel, at least behind the scenes, were not very supportive, to say the least. And I know, so I see you, but yeah, I guess I'm just hoping that it wasn't just for PR and likes, but
yeah,
this is where we are right now, and it's unfortunate.
So what about, and this is another topic of discussion that has been brought up very many times, especially on Reddit, the whole cancel culture thing, where how do I talk to a woman if I can't do this? Then how am I even supposed to interact with the woman? Or that you're innocent until proven guilty. I mean, for that, I would say this isn't really a court of law. This is if the scene, like the people that are the backbone of the scene, let's just say the casters, the tournament organizer, if they believe it and they don't want to work with somebody, that's their decision. That has nothing to do with the court of action at all. So talk to me about cancel culture and anything relating to that topic.
I'd like to quickly just talk about the court thing, because I think this is a really important thing, and again, something that I've seen with a lot of the responses on social media for people in these cases with accusations is that there are a lot of people holding on to, well, if what they did was wrong, take them to court, right? And you will expand on this soon, Nikki, I'm sure, with the we'll get to that, but just from the perspective of seeing this, I think there was a really good post that I read on Reddit where a lawyer basically explains why this is not a court situation. Like it doesn't really make sense to use the court as the golden standard for what is happening here. This is basically, so there's been people saying that, like Reddit killed this person's career, or Reddit canceled X, or the talent canceled X, or the fans did this, the fans did that, or whatever, or this person did it. I'm not sure if I can make a good analogy here. So let's say the talent are working with each other, right? We are working as a team, doing these events and putting on a product. And if something comes forward about this talent and we like internally talk about it and see what's going on, we have every right to refuse to work with someone. You have that at your workplace too. Like if somebody does something shitty at their job, they will get fired. That doesn't mean they get taken to court necessarily, right? Like it's a weird parallel to draw that everything wrong should go to court when, I don't know, maybe I'm explaining this poorly. It's like from the perspective of talent or players or whatnot. When these events
Can you use a Dota game analogy? Where you do something bad in Dota, you get banned. I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah.
It takes a while.
Yeah, maybe I'm explaining this a little bit poorly. I think
No, I think it's
my
fine.
primary gripe with this is that, and again, it comes a lot from I want to say it's a lot of the it ties in a bit with the hero worship and idol worship. There's like a clear overlap where, well, okay, if my hero is wrong, then prove it in court. You know, you want this ultimate definitive legal system proof that the person that you're a fan of did something wrong, and you will take nothing less, even if the talent altogether shun this person because of everything they've heard and experienced and stuff that they have access to that you don't as a fan, because not everything gets posted publicly for everybody to consume. You still don't trust it because it's not through the court of law. And this is where I think we can make a really good transition, because you wrote in a tweet here, Nikki, about it. Do you want to read it out, or should I just read it out?
Oh, you can go ahead.
So this is a tweet from a couple of weeks ago, where in quotation marks, if you get sexually assaulted / raped, why wouldn't you tell the police? And then there's a thread of quotes said by real judges in court during rape trials below, and she's referring to some of them. So I'll just take the 3 top ones that she posted. As the gentlemen on the jury will understand, when a woman says no, she doesn't always mean it. Men can't turn their emotions on and off like a tap like some women can. This was said by Judge Raymond Dean addressing the jury in a rape trial. Next one. I hope you'll be able to keep your well-paid job, and the couple of weeks you spend in prison will be treated by employers as part of your holidays. Judge Gabriel Hutton speaking to a guilty rapist. And then one more. It seems on the evidence that this child has not suffered as a result of these offenses. Judge Hutton talking about an 8-year-old girl who had been sexually abused for a year by a convicted child molester. Like, if this is how the court handles these things,
I'd be really interested to know what states those are from.
How are
and
you
what's
supposed
scary
to...
is that a lot of these are not, some people were like, oh, those are probably from like 50 years ago. Some of those tweets date as late as like 2018, 2019.
And it's from the US, right? These cases, I think.
Most of them are US, and then some of them, I believe it states if it was from a different country. It does say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, okay, well, how do you take this to court? You have allegations that are X years old. You have no videotape proving that it happened. So all you have is the statements, and you have these, in some cases, some of the accused have admitted stuff and just, left. But in the cases that it doesn't happen or whatnot, like even when they leave, a lot of the fan base still paints them as heroes, that they got bullied out. They did nothing wrong, but the pressure of the fans was too big. It was too big on them. Like it was just decided, let's cancel this person. Like if somebody posts sexual misconduct allegations against me, I'm going to instantly deny everything because I didn't fucking do anything. Like, why is that not the response from these people if they did nothing? Like, why is there all this pussyfooting around and being like, yeah, and blah, blah, blah. Like, if people post false allegations against me, I know I've done nothing. So there's nothing there. Like, that's what I don't understand this, like, perspective that a lot of people have, that, well, the reason they're not denying everything is that they're getting pressured by the fans to have this and this standpoint, and the fans are canceling them. Like, does this logically make sense to any of you? That if all these allegations are false, if somebody accused you, Shannon, right? Let's say somebody randomly accused you out of nowhere. That's what people are saying to me. They're like, oh, I hope you're not the next guy to get canceled from this, because people could just post allegations for you and you're fucked. You know? Like, the perspective is completely different. Right. Nobody in the scene will agree to any of it because I've done nothing. There's nothing shady against me at all from anyone in the scene.
I got you, Cinderin. Don't worry.
Like, so, like, why is this mindset a thing?
I have no idea.
It's kind of making me shake. Like, it's so unreasonable and so illogical. I just fucking hate it, you know? Like, it's so absurd. It's so absurd to me. Like, how can people think like that? I don't understand.
I mean,
like, am I wrong here? Like, is there...
No, I mean, it's I want to hope it's just a lack of education and misinformation that's being put out there. Or I think there's also a big fear in play, right? where that's the biggest take that I've seen, and same thing with my conversations with Shannon. And I get it that, man, a woman can just say something and then I'm done. But
That's
there's a lot
really
of
not how it works.
right. So the thing that people like kind of gloss over is if you look at the information or the people that we've listed here, it's not just one incident, it's multiple. There's a pattern. And there's, you know, how do you say the word corroborating evidence, stories that match up, people that vouch for it. Just because social media does not share those proofs, other people have shared the proofs internally or have seen it themselves and have backed other people up. That should speak volumes for, you know, for the audience, but sometimes it's just not enough. And that's the unfortunate side effect of the hero worship that currently exists in, you know, in this platform or on the internet or just in general in society. But I want to kind of address bringing in numbers and using like an actual like some examples that's been happening right now, because I think it's not in our scene, in the Smash scene. Jisoo, her case against Zero.
Drink some
Excuse
water,
me.
woman, for God's sake.
I inhaled air.
Oh,
Okay,
That's
well,
what you're
good
supposed
usually.
to do to be able to breathe.
Wrong hole. Okay. Sorry.
No
But
comment.
yeah, I thought like her case was, or her call out was very interesting because of how it escalated and how, and the response back, where some people came, like it got to the point that the idea right now is a man, you know, she posted screenshots not even in order to kind of throw him off and get him to admit to things or say things that is definitely I mean, she has literally a manifesto because it was like 60 something pages. You know, people are doing twit-longers in Dota. In the Smash community, they are dropping Google Docs on this.
Yeah, I saw some of those.
And it's insane to see the transition of the fan base, especially of Zero's fan base, where they called her the nastiest names and say, you're lying, you're lying. Then Zero says something that's like, well, okay, there might be some truth. And then she posts a little more stuff and they're like, there's no effing way. And she's like, all right, time to drop the hammer. And then you read this manifesto and you see everything that her and all of these other women had to go through. And for them to be comfortable enough to even put that out there, because I addressed from the start, that's scary. You're putting out there all of these decisions that you could, you know, that you did or didn't do, the things that you should or shouldn't have done, but they were 14, 15 years old at the time. And it's messed up. And then you ask yourself, well, why didn't any of this go to court? So let me throw in some numbers first, and then I'm going to talk about what she did. So right now we have the 91% of rape cases go unreported in the United States. And it's a very similar or sometimes higher number, as I brought up, in other countries. So out of the 91%, that means only 9% are getting reported. Out of that 9%, only 3% of people that commit rape or sexual harassment face jail time, any sort of jail time. So going back to that 9%, because everybody's so scared, I'm so like I have to attack this because I don't want this to happen to me. It seems to be a song that a lot of men seem to sing. You know, I have to question it because it can happen to me. If men are so scared of being falsely accused, they have numbers for that. Out of the 9% of cases that got reported, only 5% of them are found to be false. So these are like a lot of weird numbers. And me, I'm not great at math. So I actually had to do the math on this and use like a number example just to see how mind-blowingly small that number is. So if you say out of 1,000 women who've experienced rape or sexual harassment, only 90 of those women out of the 1,000 will report it. Out of the 90 who report it, only 4 or 5 of them would be lying. It's so small. And I get that it's scary, but it's so, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say it's insignificant because, man, it would suck if that was you. But the unfortunate reality of the situation is if you men are worried for yourselves or worried about your fellow man, the number of men who are also affected by rape and sexual abuse is so much higher than of men who are
Yeah.
falsely accused. You stand up for that, fight for that one. That's the thing that you should be, angry about, is that it happens to men too. I believe it's like 1 out of every 10 victims is a man, a boy. And that's what you should be angry about, is that when it happens to women, it happens to men too. And the numbers might not be as much, but it's still there. And it's still greater, far greater than you and your chance of being falsely accused. Now, when I circle back to Jisoo and what happened to her, she did try to lawyer up. She did try with whatever information she had at the time. And they straight up said, you're going to have a hard time trying to get this to stick in court. And that's the unfortunate reality of what's happening in our judicial system, not necessarily just in the US, but in a lot of places, is because it's really hard to prosecute a crime when there is no evidence of the act while it's taking place. No video
Right.
evidence or audio recording or seeing it live in person, right?
And that's usually what it is with sex, is that it's private.
Right.
So there's no evidence. You're not recording it, and there's no witnesses.
And the court isn't even like the be all end all, because you have criminal courts and civil court too. Hello, O.J. Simpson. Guy was found not guilty in criminal court, but was still found guilty in civil. So, and I mean, for the most part, a lot of people are just like, O.J. definitely did it. And it's unfortunate that our justice system isn't perfect. So but
this is the American perspective, right?
Yeah, that's at least, like, I'm just using that one as an example.
Right. I'm not completely sure how the European judicial systems differ and how they are separate internally, like how the Danish one is separate to the German, is separate to the French. But so I don't want to say anything wrong here, but my gut is that the European law systems in the individual countries are closer together than any of them is to the American one. I can't say that with full confidence, but I think there's at least largely major similarities between them compared to the American one, which has this like division the way it does. But yeah, like I said, not gonna 100% vouch for that. But I think it's important to mention, right, that this perspective is obviously American.
Yeah.
Things might be very different in Europe or in Asia or in Russia, CIS in general.
Right.
The way this stuff gets handled. So maybe it's better, or maybe it's even worse. Maybe the American one actually, in these cases, is.
Yeah, I know the U.S. Like everybody always makes jokes about that. You get tried in a court like with your peers, and everybody's like, "Really? You really want that?" Because I don't know. I don't know if it's just the U.S. that does that.
I'm very jaded on U.S. related stuff lately. We seem to be number one in all the wrong areas lately. So I going with a lot of pessimism when it comes to that, but. Let's look at some optimism, maybe, unless this turns pessimistic. Moving forward with these issues with women in gaming, which I guess we did touch on a little bit ourselves last week, Cinderin, or the week before. From your perspective, Nikki, is this just the beginning of the drama? Will there be a lot more people coming out in the future, you think? Is it just like a wave? Will this have a positive influence going forward? Like, what are the long-term ramifications for what's been transpiring with, let's just talk about Dota as opposed to esports in general.
What I'm hoping is, I'm hopeful that it's getting, at least it has that conversation starting where you hear or you see it happening in these other industries and you don't think that, oh, our little Dota bubble is safe, but it's not. And it hasn't felt safe for a big part of that community. So it's like people like myself. So I think that it being out there is a good thing, because then we can kind of start taking the steps into how to make it better. And I know, working behind the scenes with some of like the women that I've been like talking to and stuff, a lot of tournament organizers are now actively asking, like, how can we make our our events safer for the women in the scene, or the women that are attending. And then there's a conscious effort. Inclusivity, I saw like a data like tweeting out like he'd like to start hiring more women and this diversify like his hires, and I think that's fantastic. So it's progress. We just kind of unfortunately had to drop a few things along the way. I hope we don't fall back to that comfort of, okay, now that's done, time to get back into our normal case of things, because that was like the hardest thing for me when you work in a predominantly male field, is constantly having to, what's the word, either be invisible so that you can keep doing what you're doing, or try not to ruffle feathers. If you want to, be seen as an equal, you kind of have to work around it like a certain way. So I hope it gets a lot better for that. I like their whole red eye stuff. Honestly, reading about it, the fact that it took this long, if that's really how he is and how difficult, like even if he didn't do all the, how difficult he is to work with, for him to become as successful as he was, I'm kind of jealous, because as a woman, we can't get away with that stuff. There is no way I could be difficult to work with and still have a career in the industry. I couldn't even come to this podcast without thinking about what to wear, because I know if I wore a tank top in the heat of Arizona, did you guys think about what you want to wear for the podcast today? I mean, I had to think about it, because I know
I saw 2 shirts. I'm like, this one looks comfortable.
This one doesn't have literal shit on it.
Right.
This one's clean.
And
yeah, no, it's true.
And it's kind of unfortunate that I have to think about what I have to wear to have this voice in this platform right now. Because I know, even though most people won't do it, there will be some, because I've had that experience before, that will judge me and see me and be like, what the heck is she wearing? How is she supposed to be an expert in this with her tits hanging out? It's like I have cleavage. I can't help it, And same thing with like the whole Reddit. The quote from that movie again. That one was so good.
We watch a lot of movies, Cinder, and sorry to leave you out.
I know. I don't.
No,
one
it's
in particular,
really good,
I don't watch
a
very
lot
much.
of women, a lot of the women like struggle with this, and I think this is something that I want the scene to get better at. I don't want to be told that, hey, yes, you're equal. Share your thoughts. Tell us what you think, and it's good, because as she said, if I'm angry, I'm considered hysterical. If I'm emotional, I am weak. And if I ever raise my voice, I'm a bitch. So I can't have that equal conversation with other people. Meanwhile, men are able to freaking throw punches and still have a job. And I can't even say something without having to think about, am I saying this in the right way, that they're gonna, that they're still gonna wanna work with me? I don't know. And I have to think about that. So those are all of these things, like the power dynamics, how we treat women, how we see women, and how we work with them. And I want all of that to get better. It's all like a big lump, unfortunately. And it's kind of unfortunate if like the only thing that I have to ask for and sit here right now and say is, please stop sexually harassing the women in the Dota scene. Because it should be more than that. That should be a given, but it doesn't seem to be. I should be fighting for more of an equal position at this table, instead of having to just hope that, hey, someone's not going to grow my ass today. Oh.
Yeah.
I think we can all get on board with that.
From my perspective, that what we also talked about last week, I think change like this is like, it's really culturally ingrained, right? This isn't a problem that's unique to esports. So it's not like we in our industry are just doing something completely different that's despicable, and in other aspects of life this isn't there. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a consequence of the way everything else is, that this is also in esports. But pretending that it's not there and turning a blind eye doesn't do anyone any good. And at the same time, like, I hope that every time something like this comes out, that it educates people, it drives, progress in the direction. But I think at the same time, just like I said last week, I think it's important that we don't expect immediate incredible change, because things like this take time. It's a gradual thing that will take years and years to
Yeah.
get better and better and better over time. Because if you have the expectation that everything is going to magically be good in 2021, you're going to feel like you've lost by default
Mhm.
when you get there.
Yeah.
And that will be super discouraging. Then people are just going to give up because they're like, oh, well, we tried our best and it didn't happen. Well, it's happening slowly. And that's what's good. It's been like that with all sorts of societal change, with racism, with sexism, which has been worse. It's not great, but it's better now than it was X years ago in countries across the world. So it is getting better, but that doesn't mean we can't, speed it up a bit and try to be the voice of reason and help out and going in the right direction. So that's what I hope that these cases show. And especially that there's like two sides to it, right? One is the fact that people are held accountable like this and that people dare to come forward is likely to start this spiral where, first of all, it gets less and less acceptable to do things like this. But so that can be a deterrent that a lot of people maybe think twice before they do something, or are more self-conscious about the position that they're in with what they're doing. But also that the ones who have been faulted are more likely to come forward as they see over time that they get treated better and better when they come forward. And that's why it's important that there's a lot of positive reinforcement, because I can tell you firsthand that you get thrown a lot of shit at you when you take a stance on something like this. No matter which side you're on, there are a lot of people that are out to get you. And the more like positive reinforcement we can have for people telling their story and coming forward with something that's so hard, that is just for them individually, that means a lot to just, go move on with their everyday and not feel like they made a terrible mistake posting or saying something, even though they knew they were right. But also just because it reinforces the idea in other people that they can do this too. And that's kind of the whole like idea of the Me Too movement, right? Is to motivate people to start actual change by not just being one story, but being one story out of a million, right? Also really makes the problem seem a lot more authentic when you get so many more, stories about the same people or about the same industry, etc. So,
yeah. From my perspective, I can just look at myself and my growth as a person over the past 20 plus years when I've actually started, and it's less than that, but started to try to improve myself, be more empathetic. That Nikki can attest. I have lacked empathy at times, but I think as long as you're trying to improve on things that you consider faults of your own, that's kind of the starting point. So with that, let's move on to the last topic today, which is actually completely separate. And at first we thought this would be maybe a little awkward to talk about because it's not related to anything that we just previously talked about. But I think it's too big of a story, too big of a thing to put off for a week. If you guys have heard of Reckful, he was a World of Warcraft. This is where he got to start as a World of Warcraft player. Very popular streamer as well. Committed suicide recently. And suffered from depression his entire life, which I've only watched a few of his streams. I didn't really follow him that much, but I know that he was very open about his depression. His brother actually killed himself when Reckful was a kid, so I can only imagine what that family is going through. I believe they have a third son that is still alive right now. I read a roommate of Reckful talk a little bit about the situation, and there's been a lot of twitlongers and whatnot. Some of the stuff that stuck out to me were, well, number one, people blaming his friends for not doing anything. And I think that mental illness is one of those things that's just completely not understood by the masses. And even to me, that's had some, like I've had a friend, for example, very good friend of mine was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Essentially, when we were 1 year apart, so he was 1 year ahead of me, and freshman year of college, he was just completely normal, just one day snapped and turned into somebody that was completely different, started hearing voices, never really got violent or anything like that, but he was essentially abandoned by his family, which that's a whole nother thing. And he's just living, he's still alive. He's living in a horrible state. That's a whole nother story as well, going into the US system with mental illness and whatnot. It's just a complete joke. But going back to Reckful, obviously struggled for a long time, was put in the thing that stuck out to me is he was put in a mental institution for, I forget how long it was. I don't think it was that long, like a couple weeks or something like that. And because he was very suicidal throughout his life. And he was telling everybody how it was the most miserable experience of his life because the way that they have it set up was he was talked to as if he was a child, like he was literally a straight-jacketed type of person where you're talking to somebody like they don't know that you're there, where he's very aware of what's going on, but he's just very sad. Like there's nothing he can do about it. And just the treatment that he got there kind of scared him and other people within his circle from sending him back to a facility that could have helped potentially. But just a really sad state of affairs. Right. So do you guys have any thoughts about this before we wrap up the episode?
Yeah. So I read, the main thing I've read is the whole twit longer from his roommate, because I think that is the closest you're going to get to understand what's going on. And understanding mental health and mental illness is really, really difficult. A lot of the time, all logic and all your experience with the world kind of just doesn't apply, where you can't put yourself in their position because you have no reference of what it's like. So it's very difficult to be like, oh, you should do this, or, you know, these people are genuinely trying to help him, but they're kind of grasping for straws because they don't know what the help is. That's where this professional system is supposed to bridge that gap and be like, we are the people that are educated in this. We know the most out of anyone how to try to help with this heavy stuff. But if the people that they get sent to when they get are supposed to get help are the wrong people, they're treating something completely different based on what was expressed, right? With his week in that mental asylum, I think it was, that they sent him to.
Yeah.
It's like there's a complete disconnect. Like you're not even, what can you compare this to? It's like you have cancer and you get sent to the forest, and then you're like, you will find your answers to cancer in the forest, you know, like this is where you will find true enlightenment and beat cancer. It's like, no, it fucking isn't. The answer is not out there. The answer is with the people that know something. And it's a totally different story in the US because of how absurdly expensive treatment is. That's a separate issue, and which actually in part of the statement about Reckful became a problem because he had invested so much of his money into his life dream of releasing a game that I believe is still being worked on. It was called, was it Everlast?
Yeah.
Or Everland or something?
Everland,
yeah.
So he couldn't afford the treatment, which was supposed to be, was it $50,000 for a couple of weeks of treatment, which is absurd. Like a lot of people that have these mental illnesses can't get the help they need. They can't afford it. So like, it's just like the thing that's really sad about this to me is a lot of people that talk about this case are presenting it as something sudden. But now that you hear the backstory from his roommate, this has been going on for so long and he still couldn't get the help he needed. That's just really sad. Like, it's just such a sad story about somebody who was really successful, great at what he did, a smart person who just got dealt a bad hand and eventually just got fucked by the system, really. And his friends who tried their best to help him get painted by the community as bad friends because they quote unquote didn't try their best to help him. Well, it really isn't easy. I think based on what that guy wrote, they tried their damned hardest, but it's just an unbreakable case for a non-professional. You can only go so far, right? So
I know it was a different like thing that I read where they mention, or someone mentioned, that they can't even tell their own therapist if they have any desires or wanting to actually attempt suicide, just because it's a must report or for the therapist, and then you get put in those institutions. So even trying to seek that help how do you go to a therapist and say, I'm having these thoughts, or I would like to do this, help me, but the help is so bad, so you don't say anything. So it's so broken, and it's so sad when you hear or read these accounts. And it's to me, I don't know what to do other than try. How do we fix this, like on a small scale? Is it something we can do on a small scale, or our government? How do we get people to take this a little more seriously? One, normalize it. Like a lot of people are dealing with mental health, and it's not having depression or having certain like mental illnesses does not make you crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a one-to-one, and I that's, I think, a big thing, big stigma. And I remember Twitter was doing this thing where everybody was talking about, I have these mental health issues that I'm dealing with, I'm on these medications. Everybody was just like putting it out there to let other people know, hey, you're not alone. You have, you're, it's almost like that's why it's might be a little bit appropriate attaching this next to the Me Too stuff, because that's a different form of it, telling people that we're all kind of going through this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So many people.
I think a lot of it comes down to not understanding, and not to say that I fully understand it either, but just looking into it a little bit more. There was actually a really good analogy. I can't remember the streamer's name, but there was a video of him recently giving an analogy about what severe depression is like. It's like you're shoveling snow constantly out of your driveway. You have to do every single day. The snow keeps coming. If you don't deal with it, it keeps snowing on you. You just get trapped and you feel like you can't do anything. If a friend comes over, try to cheer you up, they can help you do that as well. And then they'll leave like, oh, I just fixed that. You didn't fix it. You helped temporarily because it's coming back. It's just a constant downfall. And that's what it feels like to be severely depressed. So, those very, very heavy episodes. Nikki, thank you for coming on. Appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
I thought that we would end on a high note. Would you like to tell any of your stories, perhaps from Hollywood, that would be entertaining to people? I remember one in particular, if you want to tell that one. That one is kind of hilarious.
It was very mean.
It's mean, but it's funny because you know the person as a celebrity, So I don't. Maybe Cinder doesn't even know who this is. That would be so funny.
Do you know who Roseanne is? Roseanne Barr.
Oh
my god! All right, story's ruined already.
I'm googling it.
We also have.
Just go on with the story. It's fine. He'll catch up.
So when staff meetings happen, if it's in the morning, you get usually like bagels, cream cheese. It's like a standard thing, some platter or whatever. And then if it's a lunch meeting, people order lunch and all that. So I remember that I had to do this when, as an assistant, is one of the best days is staff meeting days, because when you're a poor assistant in Hollywood, sometimes you can't, you have to pay rent, so you kind of skip breakfast. And a lot of agents, when they're done in their staff meeting, they leave the bagels and the assistants are free to feast, right? So to be clear, though, this one in particular did not happen to me, but to an assistant friend of mine, because I was not on a bagel situation. So Roseanne attended a staff
You were
meeting.
not on a bagel situation. I've never heard that one before. Okay.
So Roseanne just finished the staff meeting, and she knew with the as soon as everybody was leaving, you see the assistants coming in because they're supposed to clean up and all of that, and she sees oh, I see you guys are looking for you're looking for some scraps, and she grabs her finger, licks it, and starts dipping it in the food as they watched, and she was like, how do you like that? And then she laughs and she leaves.
What a piece
She's
of absolute
not
shit.
Very nice.
See, I feel good laughing about this now because her career was ruined because she ended up being blatantly, was it racist? I forget what it was.
Yeah.
Something happened on her show and she just got canceled off of everything. So
Yeah, she was.
he's a real pile of shit.
Yeah, I mean, and I know there's like a lot of like random small ones, like George Costanza when he had like a what's his name on Seinfeld.
Yeah. Wow. Jason Alexander.
Jason
right?
Jason Alexander. He this was so weird. So I remember I was he was coming by our office, and he was gonna walk around. He was gonna get a tour. But prior to that, I was an agent already at the time. I had as an assistant starts walking around and knocking on everybody's door, and he says, "All right, George, like or not George, Jason Alexander is going to be stopping by." I was like, "All right, that's fine." And it's like, "You cannot say anything about his wig." I was like, "What?" I was like, "Okay," and he has to go through each office to let everybody know that we're not allowed to say anything about his wig.
So it's actually from
but
Seinfeld.
It was really weird.
Him wearing this horrible wig on these episodes, and he wears it in real. Everyone knows he's bald.
No, so
I don't
yeah,
understand.
here's the thing. This was like years after Seinfeld was already over.
Yeah.
Everybody knows he's bald. So I didn't understand why he decided that I'm suddenly gonna have hair again. I don't know. But that was
all right. Last thing, who's the cuddliest, nicest guy you met in Hollywood? As the cats are about to fight behind you, it looks like Monkey wins.
There's actually a lot of nicest, cuddliest guy. Probably it's a tie between Brian Doyle Murray, which is Bill Murray's brother, and Robert Englund, the guy who plays Freddy Krueger.
I barely know who that is. I've maybe seen that movie once when I was like 8.
Nightmare on Elm Street?
Yeah, I think I remember him.
The cats are fighting.
Yes, they are. Which means we should probably end this episode because they are hungry. Hungry cats today, Cinderin.
They
anyway,
can't hear you.
To wrap up the episode, Cinderin, have you seen In Bruges?
No.
Nikki, have you seen In Bruges?
Yes.
Did you like it?
Is it good, Nikki?
Yes.
All right, come give me a high five for watching In Bruges.
Object.
Come. That's right. You are an inanimate.
I'm not
come give me a high five right now. We're not ending the episode until you come.
Are you serious?
You're wearing a wireless headset. You have zero excuse.
Oh my God.
There's not much opportunity to give high five in person on podcast, Cinderin. And she's really bad at giving high fives too.
Oh, I have to see this. Okay, look at the elbow. You need to look at the elbow, then you never miss.
That
was pretty good. If I didn't say anything, she would have missed my hand entirely. 100% guaranteed.
Okay, no.
Okay, so anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Until next, thanks again for Nikki, for coming on, or Sajedene, I should call you. You can follow her at Sajedene, which it's spelled like it is on the screen. If you're listening, it's Sajedene. Until next time, guys, Suns fans, Cinder, and Sajedene signing out. Goodbye.
Bye.
We say things that don't mean anything, but thanks for listening. Yeah.